welcome back to my kitchen. This week, let me show you how to create this fall-inspired pumpkin cake. So in order to add personalized messages onto your cakes, I'm going to be showing you how to use the sweet stamp letter sets. Now I have two of my favorites here. This one is the classic letter set, and I also have the handwritten letter set, and I just think these ones go so well together. And on the front of this cake, I'm just going to be adding Hello Fall. Now to get these out, you could use fondant, or I just like to use a small amount of blue tack. So I'm going to start by taking out Hello. So I'm just taking out all the letters that I'm going to need. And in the classic set, I'm going to be taking out the word fall, and I'm going to do this in capitals. I'm then going to take my pickup pad. So this one is the larger rectangle one, and we've got a template on the back, and this is just nice and sticky to pick up those letters to create a stamp. Now I'm laying those out, and we actually only have one of the L's, so we'll be using this one again. So I just want to make sure that I'm leaving enough space to fit that in. I'm then going to add fall, and in exactly the same way, just make sure I'm leaving enough space. I can then take my pickup pad, place that on the top, and I'm just going to push down, and that's going to pick up those letters and create a stamp. Okay, so the cake that I'm going to be adding my message onto is a 6-inch cake. It's 6 inches across and 6 inches in height. Now for my cake, I've covered this in a dusky pink rose gold colour, and I started off with some white fondant, and I've used some pink food gel before going in with a little bit of brown. Now I will put a link in the description below to a more detailed video showing how I get my cakes to this stage and how to smooth them out with lots of tips and tricks. We're then going to add the text onto the front. Now you want to do this while your fondant is still soft, as we want to be able to push those letters in. So I'm just going to place it on one side and just roll that over. So you can see we've got the imprint of those letters. I'm then going to remove all the letters apart from the L, and I can go in and just pushing in, and I'm going to pick up the other L from the classic set. And you can always go in on some of those other letters if you found that you didn't push them in enough. So there we have Hello Fall. Now in order to make my message stand out, I'm going to paint inside these embossed letters. So I've got a small amount of edible paint, and I've actually picked a black one and just a really small paintbrush. And this is one of the sweet stamp paintbrushes in the size 0. So I'm just going in and I'm resting the hand I'm painting with on my other hand just to steady it. Now, one of my biggest tips when using the sweet stamp letter sets is not to push in too far. You just want it pushed in enough that you can paint inside those letters. The further you push in, where you've got the really fiddly bits, you've got to try and get your paintbrush in there, and it can sometimes go on the edges. For these little bits down here, I've just switched to a slightly thinner paintbrush just so I can really get in there without going over the edge. And one thing I find really useful is just to keep moving the cake. So moving that cake board around, just getting into those letters where I can. So here we have the finished lettering, and I just think it looks so pretty on the front of the cake. I've added Hello Fall, but you can add any kind of message. This is great for adding names, or you could add happy birthday. You could even put the lettering on your cake board. Now I've got my cake, I want to create some cake toppers. So I thought I would create some little pumpkins, and I'm going to do these in some different colours. Now you could just use a ball of fondant on its own. I'm going to create a few quite large ones, and to stop them being too heavy for the cake, I'm going to add in some polystyrene balls inside. Adding polystyrene balls makes them not edible. So if you didn't want to use polystyrene balls, you could use Rice Krispie treats and roll these into a ball. You could also use a cake pop mixture. So some leftover cake mixed with some buttercream and rolled into a ball. I've then got some edible tints, some gold metallic luster dust, which I'm going to be mixing with some dipping solution, my Dresden tool, some edible glue, and some paintbrushes. Now I am going to be running through some different ways you could decorate these as we go, so I will introduce a few more tools. Now for the different size polystyrene balls, for the smaller 2 centimeter ball, I'm going to be using 8 grams of fondant. For the 3 centimeter ball, I'm going to be using 35 grams of fondant. For the 4 centimeter ball, 60 grams of fondant. And for the larger 5 centimeter ball, I've got 90 grams of fondant. So let me start with the larger pink ball. Now I really want these pumpkins to look really fun, like you've bought them home from the shop and you've painted them. So I'm going to start with my ball of fondant and I want to create a little bowl or dish shape. So just pushing in a little dent. I can then paint on some edible glue, and this is just going to allow that polystyrene ball to stick. Place that in the center and just work that fondant up the side. Now when we get to the top, we can add on a small amount more edible glue. And if you were using Rice Krispie treats or cake pop balls, you do this in exactly the same way. Once it's closed, just pull that fondant together so that that ball is completely surrounded. And we're going to roll that to get rid of as many marks as we can. I then want to make my ball a little bit wider. So I'm just going to push on the top just to thin out that fondant and push it down the side. Once you're happy with the shape, we're going to add in some detail. So I've got my Dresden tool, and first of all, I'm going to start with the thinner end. So at the bottom, just pull a line all the way up. I'm then going to work my way around the pumpkin, just holding it still. And don't worry if you can see the polystyrene ball at the top, we will be covering it with the stalk. You can then go in, so I'm going to go in with the wider end on this one because it is quite large. And just from the bottom, pull in and really add in a little dent. And this is just going to give us the shape of our pumpkin. Once you've got that initial shape, you can then add some more lines in. So from the top and just up from the bottom. Just adding in some little texture marks. I'm then going to add in a small amount of colour. So I've got some blush pink edible tint. Now this is a little bit dark, so I'm going to mix this in with some corn flour. And this is just going to lighten it slightly and just soften that pink colour. And this is a great tip with any colour, or if you painted on some edible tint that you think is a little bit dark, you can just dust over some corn flour and it will just lighten it slightly. I'm then going to use a brush just to dust that on down those lines, just to really highlight that texture. Now, in order to create the stalk for the top, I'm going to take a small ball of white fondant. I can then tape it down on one side, and then at the other end, I'm going to use my finger just to pull that out, just creating kind of a hat shape. You want to check that fits. This one you could take up into a point and then twist it. I'm actually going to make it look like it's been cut off. I'm going to stick this onto the top. I can then use my Dresden tool, and first of all, where those lines come up that were created on the pumpkin, I'm going to pull those in. Run up, just creating some texture lines. And just making it look like it's part of that pumpkin. I've then got some gold metallic edible luster dust, and this is the Pure Gold by Sweet Sticks. I'm going to mix that with some dipping solution to create an edible paint. Now this isn't the only way to create an edible paint. I do have a video on my channel showing 6 different ways, so I will put a link to this in the description below. I'm then going to paint that gold onto the stalk. So there we have our pink pumpkin. Now I'm going to put this to one side just to firm up slightly while I make a few more so that we can add some final decoration. Next, I've got my 4 centimeter ball and 60 grams of fondant, and this one I'm using white. So again, I'm making a dish shape before pulling it all the way around. Before going in with that Dresden tool, add in those lines exactly like I did with the larger one. Now I realised the white one might be a little bit trickier to see, but I wanted to show you that for this one I'm going to use some shadow grey edible tint. And again, I've just got my corn flour just to make that grey a little bit more subtle. And then I've got a slightly thicker brush. I'm just using to buff some of that into the bottom. I can then add my stalk in exactly the same way. So I've just made this one slightly smaller than the one that we created for the bigger pumpkin. Go in, add in that detail, and then again, just painting it in gold. Okay, so here we have our pumpkins. I've got some in different sizes and in different colors. Now I'm going to add some design onto these. I want to add some polka dots onto the white ones and some little hearts onto the pink one. Now for this, I'm going to be using the texture tools, and these are also by Sweet Stamp. These are like mini tiny ball tools, so they've got little small balls at the end. You could use a paintbrush or you could use an edible pen. I just find that using the little balls give perfect circles, so they give really pretty polka dots. I'm going to use the edible tint and add in some dipping solution. So first of all, I'm just going to take those white ones and I'm going to use the texture tool with a slightly larger ball at the end. I can then dip this into my edible paint and just start popping on those polka dots. And this just looks so pretty against the white. So there we have our pumpkin, and I'm going to do the same to the slightly smaller one. Onto the pink one, I'm going to add some hearts. So I'm going to do this in exactly the same way. I'm going to use some of the dusky pink edible tint and add in some dipping solution to create a paint. I'm then using that texture tool and I'm going to create 2 dots. So the first one I'm going to add on and then just drag down slightly. I'm then going to put one directly next to this and just join that tail up to create this pretty little heart. And I'm going to do this all over my pumpkin. So here we have our heart pumpkin. Now our cake is ready. We can start adding on some of those pumpkins. So first of all, I'm just going to get them in the right position before gluing them down. And to finish it off, I created this teeny tiny one with some white polka dots. And there we have our Hello Fall pumpkin cake. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial and will be able to use some of these techniques on your own cakes. If you have enjoyed the video, as always, please don't forget to give it a like. And if you'd like to see more videos like this and you haven't already, then don't forget to subscribe to the Cakes by Lane's YouTube channel. Now, I will put a list of all the tools that I've used throughout today's video in the description below, so you can find them there. So until next time, bye.